the Laughing Cavalier here, presenting to you another tale of these troubled times. Today I shall be doing something a little different, and that is a new series I'm calling A Quick Review Of. I quite often get a lot of comments asking me to review things, but as you can see by the length of my videos, my reviews end up being very long and take ages to edit. So I've started this series where I will briefly review a series or film for its historical accuracy, in much the same way I structure my Tudor rants, looking at characters and story versus history, authenticity versus history, and how it stands as a drama, and then a conclusion. As mentioned, these won't be as in-depth as my proper reviews, but will serve as a stopgap measure until I can produce a full-length review on them in the future. And so, with that out of the way, we shall be looking at the 2015 BBC series Wolf Hall, based off of the book series by Hilary Mantel. And since it is a BBC series, I will only be using screenshots since our glorious state broadcaster has never heard of fair use. The main story runs from roughly 1524 to 1536 and is focused on Thomas Cromwell, played by Mark Rylance, a man of humble origins who enters the service of Cardinal Wolsey, the King's chief minister, played in this series by Jonathan Pryce. It follows the downfall of Wolsey and Cromwell's subsequent rise to power as Henry VIII's new right-hand man. Now, history has not been kind to Thomas Cromwell, who has been interpreted as anything from a hired lackey of the king to a Grima Wormtongue-like figure, using his position to remove his enemies. Wolf Hall is different in that it gives us a more sympathetic portrayal of the man, showing parts of his life not often talked about, like his wife and daughters, who all died of the sweating sickness. Some historians, like David Starkey, have criticised this being included, stating that, "I gather Hilary Mantel has imagined this wonderful tender experience of Thomas Cromwell losing his wife and children, and you have a great deal of emoting. This is total fiction. There is not a scrap of evidence for it at all. So the thing that's used to create Cromwell as a sympathetic character is total fiction." Now, I am actually going to have to disagree with him here. We don't have any sources as to his feelings on the matter, but it's not a leap in the dark to say that he would be upset. If I had a wife and two daughters and then they suddenly dropped dead one day, I would hope that I would show some sadness, and even the ruthless man like Cromwell would be a little sad at losing his wife and daughters, I imagine. This is one of those things where you have to fill in the gaps, and to be honest, I have no problem with it. I do agree with Starkey, though, that Cromwell educating his daughters is perhaps a bit out of character for the time period, with, ironically, his archenemy Sir Thomas More being the man who broke convention and gave his daughters a good education. A bit more on More in a moment. Overall, I do think this was an interesting look at Cromwell as a more of a sympathetic figure, doing what he has to do in order to survive, and Mark Rylance was a really good choice for the role. Initially, I thought he didn't look quite right physically, but he portrayed the role pretty damned well. I will say that he was a little too sympathetic at times, and his loyalty to Wolsey is perhaps overdone, since he was a lot more opportunistic than he is here, with the historical Cromwell stating that he was quite willing to look for other ways to survive once his master was out of office. Cromwell is also made out to be a more noble figure in comparison to other characters in the series, whilst other ones were made to look more evil than they historically were, which leads me quite neatly on to Sir Thomas More, played by Anton Lesser. Now, of course, the historical More wasn't quite as noble as the man for all seasons More we're all used to, and it was interesting to see a different take on him as a firm Catholic persecuting Protestants, although I will point out that most of the sources on that come from decades later when Protestantism was firmly entrenched. But I do think they went a bit overboard in making him out to be a villain at times. Again, though, interesting to see a different take, and I thought the actor playing him was very good. Anne Boleyn, played by Claire Foy, does suffer from villain syndrome a bit as well, although since she's such a divisive figure, it is inevitable that we have such divergent depictions of her over the years. And to be fair, a lot of what she does in this series, like urging Henry to have Mary married off and turning on Cromwell, is accurate. Claire Foy did a really great job of showing the more scheming side of Anne, and actually, in the last episode, was very sympathetic in spite of the previous episodes. I would actually put her quite highly on my list of favourite actresses to have played Anne Boleyn. Then we have Damien Lewis as Henry VIII. Of course, my top two Henrys will always be Keith Michelle and Robert Shaw, in that order, but Damien comes a close third, capturing the gentle side of Henry very well, and also his temperamental side, one second being very amiable, the next seething of rage, although I think his angry scenes were not as good. Of the rest of the cast, the only other main character I would perhaps criticise the portrayal of would be Lady Jane Rochford, played by Jessica Raine, with her being portrayed as the scheming figure working with Cromwell to bring down her own husband and sister-in-law, whereas it is now believed this is not true. However, Hilary Mantel herself has admitted that she was a bit unfair on her, and of course her original book was published some years ago, probably before the reappraisal of her life, so I cannot complain too much. The men brought down with Anne are also quite negatively portrayed, whereas in reality they were a lot more noble, so if I get round to a full review I will bring it up then. However, we are seeing the whole story from Cromwell's perspective, so it could be argued this is how he sees these characters and uses it to justify his actions, or, as he says in the last episode, I need guilty men, so I found men who are guilty. In terms of the plot, I will criticise the constant repeating of that play about Wolsey's downfall, which, whilst it did happen, albeit not with the people the show portrays, it does get on your nerves a bit when it is repeated at least once or more per episode. We do get a bit more on the Reformation, though, and Cromwell's involvement, even seeing Parliament voting for once. Some things are a bit off, like Henry being unconscious after his 1536 jousting accident, which it now looks like wasn't as serious as originally thought, but again, this was before a lot of this was reappraised, so I cannot fault the series for that. Some of the early episodes can be a bit jarring since they go back and forth a bit between 1524 and 1528-29, but once we get going it isn't too bad. I will say that the reasons for Anne turning on Cromwell are not really gone into as much, with historical Anne disagreeing with Cromwell on foreign policy and the use of funds from the monasteries being left out, which is a shame since that would really have helped to show why the two former allies turned into bitter enemies. Finally, in Wolf Hall, we have a recent Tudor drama that somewhat tries to be authentic. All the ladies are wearing hoods of some sort, although a few aren't perfect like the French hoods, but hey, better than the Philippa Gregory stuff. The gentlemen's outfits are pretty decent, and they even have codpieces. Not as large as the real-life ones, but apparently the prudish BBC thought they looked ridiculous, to which I say piffle. One or two outfits do look a bit modern to my eye, like this one Rafe Sadler is wearing, but it is a damn sight better than the other dramas I've had to endure. Sometimes the court scenes feel a bit small, but again, it is a limited production with limited amount of extras they could hire, and given that, I think they did well utilising what they had. Some events, like Anne Boleyn's execution, were very well done and authentic right down to the finer details, although there is debate to this day over how it went exactly. But hey, at least they went with a source for it. I think the greatest strength of this series is the casting, with Mark Rylance, Claire Foy and Damien Lewis being particular standout performances in my eyes. I will say that Mark Gatiss' portrayal of Mark Gatiss, Stephen Gardner, became a bit predictable, with him basically being a Saturday cartoon villain of the week sort of guy, and a few other bits as previously mentioned. However, at least they all have character. Some, like Jane Seymour, are consistently portrayed as being nice and quite friendly. Jane Rochford is scheming. Cromwell trying to be a good person, but in effect being forced to do bad things, and so on. It makes a nice change from the usual bitching and aggression we see in other Tudor-related dramas of late. You do get some arty-farty things in there, like that weird scene in the last episode where Cromwell has a nightmare where he's at dinner and sees Anne dragged before him across the dinner table, which, seriously, what was that about? But generally it didn't do that too much. The soundtrack was great as well, and really added to the atmosphere. In fact, I went as far as to buy the digital album with all the period pieces on, and then found out that YouTube has been automatically uploading the whole album, probably without the permission of the BBC. Well done, YouTube, never change. Overall then, Wolf Hall does have its flaws in terms of accuracy, some quite major actually, but others can be explained away by either a lack of evidence or differing interpretations over the years. Obviously, if/when I do a full review, I will no doubt find other egregious errors, but I was pretty satisfied with this series, which I think was saved by its casting, and the fact that it can stand out as a drama on its own in spite of the history. And whilst one or two scenes got on my wick, I always wanted to see the next episode, unlike The Spanish Princess, which made me want to jump off a cliff. Now that the final book is coming out next year, I'm really looking forward to a second season of Wolf Hall to finish it off. Well, that is all for now. Thank you for listening. This has been the Laughing Cavalier, wishing you a good day.